This was my 2021 Specialized Kenevo with a Brose motor. So this video applies to Levo, Kenevo, and the Brose motors in general. These bikes have a belt inside of the motor system that needs some maintenance. So my bike has 2,000 miles on it. Got the motor replaced at 1,000, so it's overdue for a belt change. So I'm gonna walk you through all this and give you a couple bonus tips. Step number one for the DIY fix, we're gonna need a whole bunch of tools. So I got a whole bunch of Amazon parts here, and I'll link the ones in the description that actually worked. Word of caution here, there was a bit of a learning curve for me to do this, so if you're not mechanically inclined, it could be a little bit difficult. We're gonna remove the battery from the bicycle with a 6mm Allen key. Then we're gonna unbolt the perimeter bolts around the motor, and you do have to disconnect the main pivot. That would be this part of the frame, the bolt I'm taking out now. On the drive side, you have 3 bolts to take out as well. You don't have to take the linkage apart, but let me give you a warning of hindsight here. The horse link bearings inside of the chainstay like to freeze up on Specialized bikes, so replace these at a minimum, but you should replace all the bearings on the bike at this time and fully disassemble it. The cranks come off with an 8mm Allen key, and it's a better idea to not use an impact gun, but they're self-extracting, and this is a really easy job. On the non-drive side, we have a bunch of 3mm Allen keys, and we're going to unbolt this because the electrical connections are behind there. Moving over to the drive side, we need a specialty socket, the one on your screen now, linked in the description, to take this nut off, and it comes off pretty easy. I used an impact gun. I don't know if you're supposed to. Now, I was watching the eBike motor repairs YouTube videos, and I learned some critical steps here. We don't want to put any pressure on this snout right here. So we're going to use a 22mm with our puller. So this part is actually called the spider, and we need to extract this with a puller. Fortunately, one of those Amazon pullers I ordered worked like a charm. So this is a pretty simple procedure with the correct tool. I think it was like $20 puller. The motor's just about ready to come out, but I made a couple of mistakes here. There's actually a bolt behind the chainstay you need to access to pull the motor out of the bike. So you have to kind of lift up the entire rear triangle to get your 5mm socket Allen key on there to loosen it up. At this point, the motor was ready to come out of the bike, but it was stuck because I forgot to unplug the 2 electrical connectors on the non-drive side. So here's one of the connectors. It's kind of a wide rectangular one, and then the speed sensor is a very tiny one you need to be very careful with. Here's some bonus action. My friend talked me into diagnosing his e-bike, the stupidest decision I ever made. So I took my known good motor and plugged it into his bike, put it in walk mode, and the bike itself is good, so that means the motor in his bike is actually bad. So this was a little test run to take a motor apart that wasn't mine and not in a working condition anyway. The motor in my friend's bike had a crispy brand new belt, and it had like 300 miles on it, and at this point I just hit the brakes. I'm like, I'm not going any further than the belt on this motor because going inside e-bike motors is a super specialty repair item. I got on the internet and found one repair shop in the entire United States of America. Out of Tennessee, we got the ebikemotorrepair.com. So this is how it works. You open a service ticket, you agree to like $300 estimate, then he takes it apart, diagnoses you, calls you personally, and tells you how much it's going to cost. Before sending the motor out to the e-bike motor repair place in Tennessee, I took the non-drive side cover off this, and do not do that. I was just basically experimenting with a dummy motor that was about to get a professional repair. There's a plug right here, and you cannot plug this back in. You have to fully disassemble the motor. So if you take the non-drive side cover off, you're completely effed, and you have to send it out to have it professionally repaired. Brose is actually how you say it. I was recently informed. It is a German company, and that's a very stupidly engineered German thing. Main distribution, or the power inlet for the motor, it's kind of a modular system. It didn't seem too hard to take apart, but you're going to need to do a whole bunch of pressing, and it wasn't worth my learning curve and buying all the tools to fully disassemble the motor. Jumping back into the basic maintenance you can do at home on my Kenevo motor that was a known working motor. Once the motor's on the bench, remove this plastic cover, and then you're going to expose all the dirt that's on this motor. This could make the motor overheat, but remember, it's a mountain bike part. It's going to get dirty in like a week anyway, but it's definitely worth cleaning with some alcohol, rags, and a brush. On the bottom of the motor, you have a Brose sticker that says, "Do not tamper." If you remove this sticker, you void the warranty on your bike, and unfortunately with Specialized, you only have one option. Either the motor blows up and you get a new motor, you're not allowed to do any maintenance, even from an authorized Brose repair place. Once that sticker's out of the way and your bike's out of warranty, we're going to remove the tiny little grub screw that's underneath the sticker that's like a 2mm Allen key. This will release the tension on the timing belt inside, or drive belt, whatever you call it. Once the grub screw is removed, we can now remove the case on the drive side only. The drive side only. If you remove the non-drive side, you're absolutely effed. It is a very Germanly engineered thing with a whole bunch of different bolts and torque bolts, and you have to start on the non-drive side to access the cover on the drive side. After verifying that I took every single bolt out holding the drive side cover in place, I gave it a couple love taps, and I'm like, why won't this thing come off? So whenever a German engineers something, they're like, let's make a mechanic's life as difficult as possible. There was one hidden screw on the non-drive side, so be very careful to not fully debolt the non-drive side. The drive side motor case that exposes the belt will just basically fall off in place, so if yours is stuck, that means you missed one bolt. Here is the Kenevo motor riding in full turbo for 1,000 miles. The belt was definitely quite a bit degraded. I only ride my bike in turbo, and basically it shows here. I know people, my dad has a Levo at 10,000 miles on the original belt, so depending on how much power you are asking out of your bike is how fast your belt is going to wear out. On my first Specialized Levo bike, basically the motor blew up mid-ride, and this is what it'll sound like. Fortunately, you can still ride the bike when the belt breaks. It's just like a normal bottom bracket underneath it.
You're probably 2/3 there.
2/3?
Yeah.
Fortunately, the eBike motorrepair.com, they also sell DIY parts. Technically, you're supposed to replace the bolts in the case every time you open it and change the belt. In this case, it costs $200. They're stretch bolts, and you're not supposed to reuse stretch bolts because they stretch. But they did have a belt-only option, and I decided to send it with the old bolts. Once again, the eBikeMotorRepair.com, they have excellent YouTube videos giving you tips and tricks. So he informed me in his YouTube video, you need to pry this seal out. Before we put the case and the new belt on, then we're going to push that seal in after the case is in place to make sure no water goes inside the motor. Once it's all clean in there and you remove all the belt debris, you want to give the new belt, a nice healthy dose of Vaseline. Of all things on a rubber belt. But hey, I didn't make the repair manual, so let's do it. The belt easily pushes into place and there's no timing mark, so that's a good thing. You slide the tensioner in and then you attach the case to the motor. Now I use the torque wrench to do the first initial torque setting, and then per the repair manual they want you to stretch these bolts, meaning turn it 90 degrees. And some retard engineer German thinks that stretching torque bolts is a good idea. It's not. Just use a 1/4 millimeter ratchet and tighten these as tight as they will physically go. Once the case is in place, we're going to tighten up the grub screw that sets the tension on the belt. You're going to add a little bit of Loctite to this grub screw. I think it said red, I can't remember. Look up the torque spec, but I do believe it was 2 Newton meters, and I bought this torque wrench off Amazon that went to 2 Newton meters. That was the only bolt that I tightened on this motor according to the specifications, because it is very important because it sets the tension on the belt. I added a little bit of dielectric grease to all the connectors because that will keep water out of the motor. Once the grub screw is in place, I took my 1/4 millimeter ratchet and I looked around the motor, and I just decided to tighten every single bolt on this motor to make sure nothing rattles loose. I forgot to film this, I was a little bit frustrated, but when the case is all tightened together, you're going to install the seal on the drive side snout, the one that I took off the motor when it was apart. Main plastic shell is ready to go back on the motor, and then we get to put it in the bike, and this was definitely the hardest part. Take a screenshot of this because it was a little bit of a learning curve for me. The way this motor sits in the bike is kind of vertical, and the blue ones go on the non-drive side, and this is how it sits. So screenshot that if you're ever frustrated doing this. It's a really good idea to replace your dropper post cable at this time because that motor needs to come out to replace that cable. This is what I came up with. I got a ladder and a strap so I can manipulate the rear triangle. You should just fully disassemble the bike if you're ever doing this. Start off with the bolt behind the chainstay because this one's really difficult to get to and you actually have to bend the brake line to do it. Now we're going to plug in all the electrical connectors on the non-drive side and put the cover on. But quick tip here, before assembling this bike, plug everything in and make sure it works. I'm not sure if you need to fully disconnect all these linkages, but it definitely made life easier and I got to check all the bearings and found some really bad ones. Installing the cranks, super simple, 8mm. Jumping over to the drive side, we have to use our specialty socket from Amazon to put the lock ring on the spider. Look up the torque spec, I think it was 20 or 30 Newton meters or foot pounds or something. It's not super tight. You want to be careful because these motors are delicate. You're actually going to need the chain to torque this and press the brake. I struggled with this for quite a bit. The moment of truth has arrived and the bike is giving assistance, but be warned this was pretty difficult, so use resources like the ebikemotorrepair.com. Now click this video on your screen because you gotta see what happens when I try to swap motors on a specialized bike.